A law school dropout. A ruthless CEO. One chance encounter that changes everything. She wasn't supposed to matter, a delivery girl, just another name to forget. But when she locked eyes with Chicago's most powerful attorney, she didn't flinch. She challenged him. And he noticed. Now, she's stepping into a world where power is everything. And she's about to prove she belongs. Let the game begin. The cold Chicago wind cut through the streets like a blade, sharp and merciless. Ivy Quinn pulled her jacket tighter around her body as she gripped the brown paper bag in her hands. One last delivery. That was all she needed to finish her shift. Then she could go home, collapse on her tiny couch, and maybe, just maybe, get 5 hours of sleep before doing it all over again tomorrow. She glanced down at the address on her phone. Wilder Wexler Law Firm. Her stomach twisted slightly. She had heard of this place, one of the most powerful and prestigious law firms in Chicago. The kind of place she once dreamed of working at before life had other plans. Before she had to drop out of law school. Before she had to trade textbooks for takeout bags. Ivy shook the thought away and pushed forward, stepping into the gleaming skyscraper. The lobby was a sea of designer suits and polished shoes. Everything reeked of money and power. Ivy didn't belong here. But she didn't care. She strode toward the elevators, her boots clicking against the marble floor. She pressed the button and waited, tapping her fingers against the bag. The doors slid open, revealing a crowded space packed with men and women in business attire. The tension was thick, like no one had the patience for each other, yet they all needed to get where they were going. Ivy stepped in without hesitation. And then, the elevator beeped. A sharp, robotic voice cut through the air. Maximum capacity reached. Please exit. An uncomfortable pause followed. Eyes darted around. No one moved. Ivy sighed, shifting the weight of the bag in her arms. All right, someone's gotta get out, she said, half annoyed, half impatient. Silence. No one budged. Her gaze swept over the sea of stiff suits and fake indifference until they landed on him. A man standing near the control panel, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. He exuded power, confidence, and worst of all, he looked completely unfazed, like he was too important to even register the inconvenience. Ivy narrowed her eyes. You, she pointed at him. You're standing closest. Step out. A few people visibly stiffened. Someone sucked in a sharp breath. That was the first sign that she had just made a huge mistake. The second sign. The way the man's steel gray eyes slowly lifted to meet hers, filled with something cold, calculating, and just a little amused. And then he spoke, his voice smooth, authoritative, dripping with undeniable arrogance. Excuse me. Ivy held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. The elevator is overweight. You're by the door. Step out so the rest of us can get where we need to go. Another stretch of silence. One of the lawyers in the back cleared his throat nervously. A woman bit her lip, eyes darting between Ivy and the man like she was watching a bomb about to detonate. Ivy didn't care. She was exhausted, hungry, and she had zero patience for entitled rich men who thought the world revolved around them. I have an important delivery, she added. The man arched an eyebrow. And I have a company to run. Something about the way he said it, so casual, so matter of fact, made her blood boil. Oh, so he was that guy. The type who thought his time was worth more than everyone else's. Ivy let out a short, humorless laugh. Wow. That's cute. But I don't see how that helps us right now. His lips curved slightly. Not a smile. Something sharper. Amusement. Interest. But before he could respond, a man in the back made the decision for them. "I'll step out," he muttered quickly, squeezing past them. The doors slid shut. Ivy barely had a second to process the strange tension before the elevator lurched upward. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to give the arrogant CEO any more of her energy. But as the numbers climbed, she could feel it. His eyes on her. Assessing. Calculating. Like she had done something no one else had ever dared to do before. And the worst part? She had no idea who the hell he was. The elevator doors slid open, and Ivy stepped out quickly, determined to shake off the tension from earlier. She had a job to do. No smug CEO was going to ruin her night. She followed the hallway, scanning the suite numbers until she found it. Wilder Wexler, CEO's office. Taking a breath, she knocked once, adjusting the bag in her arms. "Delivery for Mr. Wilder," she called out. Behind her, footsteps echoed down the hallway. A familiar presence. Before she could turn. "No need to knock," a deep voice said behind her. "I'm already here." Ivy froze. Slowly, she turned. And there he was. Knox Wilder. The arrogant man from the elevator. The CEO. The man she had just told to step aside like he was some intern. His grey eyes gleamed with undeniable amusement. "Well," he mused, unlocking the door with ease. "Looks like your important delivery just got a lot more interesting." Ivy's stomach dropped. "Oh? Shit." Ivy stood frozen, gripping the paper bag like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The smug jerk from the elevator, the one she had just challenged without hesitation, was Knox Wilder. CEO. Powerhouse. And, apparently, her customer. Her worst nightmare. Knox pushed the door open, stepping aside as if inviting her in. "Well?" His voice was smooth, controlled. "Are you going to stand there all night, or do you actually plan on delivering that?" Ivy snapped out of it, forcing herself to move. "Here." She strode in, setting the bag firmly on his desk. Knox didn't reach for the food. Instead, he leaned against the desk, arms crossed, watching her with interest. No apology. Ivy blinked. "For what?" "For assuming you could tell me what to do." "Oh, so we're doing this again?" She tilted her head, eyes sharp. "No," she said flatly. A pause. Then, Knox let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Interesting." Ivy turned to leave, but before she could reach the door. "Wait." Her steps halted. She should keep walking. She shouldn't care about anything else he had to say. But something in his tone made her hesitate. She glanced back. "What?" Knox took a slow step forward. "Let me ask you something." His gaze was unreadable, but there was something calculating beneath it, like he was testing her. "Hypothetically," he said, "if someone signs a contract under duress, is it legally binding?" Ivy blinked. "Wait, what?" She wasn't expecting a legal pop quiz. But the moment the question registered, something inside her snapped into place. A part of her she had buried ever since she left law school. "Depends," she said instantly. "If there's clear proof of coercion, the contract can be voided. But verbal threats alone won't cut it. You need tangible evidence that the signer had no reasonable alternative but to comply." Knox's gaze didn't waver. "And if they signed but later claimed coercion? Then the burden of proof is on them." She crossed her arms. "Unless there's evidence of deception, misrepresentation, or an unfair advantage, the contract stands." A pause. Then, Knox smirked. Not the mocking kind from earlier. Something sharper. Intrigued. Impressive. Ivy's pulse kicked up a notch, but she kept her face neutral. Was that a test? Knox's smirk deepened. Maybe. Well, I don't work for you, so I don't need to pass. Knox studied her for a second longer, then reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a business card. He held it between two fingers, extending it toward her. Maybe you should. Ivy stared at the card, not moving. What's this? A challenge, Knox said smoothly. You clearly have a sharp mind. I could use someone like that. Her eyes narrowed. Use me how? I need an assistant, he said. Someone quick on their feet, who isn't afraid to challenge me. Ivy let out a short laugh. You want me to work for you? Based on a 2-minute legal debate. No, Knox countered. I want you to prove that you're worth hiring. Come to my office tomorrow. If you're as smart as you seem, I might offer you something better than food deliveries. Ivy's stomach flipped. This had to be a joke. Men like him didn't hand out opportunities to women like her. But the way he was looking at her, like he saw something she wasn't sure she even saw in herself anymore. That scared her more than anything. Ivy took the card, flipping it over between her fingers. And if I say no? Knox's expression didn't change. Then you keep doing what you're doing. He shrugged. But something tells me that's not enough for you. Ivy didn't respond. Because deep down, she knew he was right. Without another word, she turned and walked out. But as she stepped into the elevator, gripping the card tightly, she already knew. She was going to show up tomorrow. Even if it was just to prove him wrong. Ivy stared at her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls, adjusting the blazer she had borrowed from Emma. It was slightly loose at the shoulders, but it would have to do. This was it. Wilder Wexler. The kind of law firm she once dreamed of working at. And now, she was stepping inside not as a lawyer, but as a damn assistant. She wasn't sure if this was an opportunity or a mistake. But she was about to find out. The moment Ivy stepped onto the executive floor, she felt the shift in energy. Suits moved past her like sharks through water. The air smelled of expensive coffee, leather-bound contracts, and ruthless ambition. No one acknowledged her presence. No one smiled. She was a nobody here. And they all knew it. Then, you must be the new experiment. Ivy turned toward the voice. A man leaned casually against the reception desk, arms crossed, exuding confidence. Dark brown hair, piercing blue eyes, a perfectly tailored suit. Ryan Dawson. The moment their eyes met, she knew. He wasn't just another lawyer. He was a problem. Excuse me. Ivy raised an eyebrow. Ryan smirked. Knox Wilder latest project. Let me guess, he saw some kind of untapped potential in you. Ivy held his gaze, refusing to let him see the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. I don't see how that's your business. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, sweetheart, everything in this firm is my business. Before she could fire back, another voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Ryan. Ivy turned and saw an older man in his 60s, silver hair combed back neatly, wearing an expensive charcoal suit. Mr. William Harris, co-founder of Wilder Wexler. And judging by the way his sharp eyes flickered over her, he wasn't impressed. Mr. Harris, Ryan greeted smoothly, flashing an easy smile. Just welcoming our new recruit. Mr. Harris barely looked at him. Instead, his piercing gaze landed on Ivy. Miss Quinn, is it? His voice was calm, but there was something cold beneath it. Ivy straightened. Yes, sir. He studied her for a moment, then turned to Olivia, who had just arrived. Tell me, Olivia, when did we start hiring delivery girls as legal assistants? A heavy silence fell over them. Ivy's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression neutral. Before Olivia could answer, another voice cut in smoothly. When they prove they deserve to be here. Knox. He had just stepped out of his office, completely unfazed by the tension. He met Mr. Harris' gaze head-on. She's here because I want her here. Mr. Harris didn't blink. And you believe that's a good enough reason? Knox's smirk barely faltered. It's my firm too, isn't it? A pause. Then Mr. Harris let out a slow exhale, as if already regretting this conversation. I hope you're right about her, Knox. His gaze flickered back to Ivy, voice cool as ice. Because if you're wrong, I'll be the one cleaning up your mess. With that, he walked away. Ryan shot Ivy one last smug glance before following. Ivy gritted her teeth. She had barely been here 5 minutes, and they were already waiting for her to fail. Fine. Let them wait. Because she had zero intentions of proving them right. Knox's office was a sleek, modern battlefield, glass walls, dark wood, a skyline view of Chicago that screamed power. And sitting behind the desk, completely unfazed, was Knox Wilder. He barely looked up from his laptop. You're late. Ivy bit back an eye roll. By 30 seconds. Knox finally glanced at her, a ghost of a smirk appearing. I see we're still counting. Before she could reply, Olivia cleared her throat. Mr. Wilder, are we sure about this? She asked, arms crossed. Knox leaned back in his chair. She held her own against me in the elevator. That alone makes her more competent than half the people in this office. Ivy's lips parted slightly. Did he just compliment her? Olivia didn't look convinced, but gave a small nod. Fine. But don't expect me to clean up the mess if she crashes and burns. Ivy clenched her jaw. Wow. Love the vote of confidence. Knox didn't seem fazed. He just turned to Ivy and slid a folder across the desk. Your first task. She picked it up, scanning the legal jargon. This is a non-disclosure agreement. Knox nodded. Sign it. Then we talk. Ivy glanced between him and Olivia. This was it. If she signed, she was in. If she walked away, she could forget this ever happened. Her fingers tightened around the pen. Then she signed. Knox's smirk deepened. Welcome to Wilder Wexler. Ivy slammed the door shut behind her, kicking off her shoes. What did I just do? Emma, lounging on their tiny couch, raised an eyebrow. Sell your soul. Ivy groaned, throwing herself onto the couch. Basically. Emma handed her a beer. Tell me everything. Ivy exhaled. Knox Wilder is an insufferable control freak. His assistant hates me. Some lawyer named Ryan Dawson definitely wants me to fail. And I just signed a contract that might ruin my life. Emma grinned. Hot CEO, corporate sabotage, and legal drama. Babe, you're literally living in a TV show. Ivy buried her face in a pillow. I'm so screwed. Emma laughed, shaking her head. Nah. You're just getting started. Ivy had no idea why she was here. She had been at Wilder Wexler for less than a week. Her role: fetch coffee, organize files, and try not to piss off Olivia or get crushed by Ryan Dawson's ego. But now, she was sitting in the biggest conference room in the firm, surrounded by top-tier lawyers, across from one of the most powerful corporate clients in Chicago, Arthur Sinclair. And she was expected to sit there and stay quiet. Yeah. Not exactly her style. The tension in the room was thick. Arthur Sinclair, a man in his 60s with predatory eyes and a billion-dollar empire, sat at the head of the table. His team of lawyers flanked him like soldiers protecting a king. On the other side, Wilder Wexler's best. Knox sat at the center, poised, unreadable, exuding power like it was second nature. Ryan Dawson, looking smug as ever, leaned back in his chair. Olivia was reviewing documents, with her usual razor-sharp focus. And Ivy. She sat at the farthest end, silent, invisible. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was just an assistant. This meeting was way above her pay grade. But then, Sinclair's lawyer flipped to the last page of the merger contract and nodded. Everything looks solid. If Mr. Sinclair is satisfied, we can move forward with signing. Knox didn't blink. Good. Then let's finalize this. Pens clicked. Contracts were about to be signed. Ivy skimmed the document one last time. And that's when she saw it. A single clause, buried deep in the legal jargon, so subtle it was almost invisible. But if they signed with this in place, Wilder Wexler wouldn't just be finalizing a merger. They'd be handing Sinclair full control. Her stomach dropped. Why hadn't anyone caught this? Ryan. Olivia. Even Knox. Ivy's pulse pounded. She wasn't supposed to speak. She could let it slide. She could stay safe. Or she could do something insane. And well, she had never been the type to keep quiet. Wait. The room went silent. All eyes turned to her. Ryan's head snapped in her direction, annoyance flashing in his eyes. Olivia looked half curious, half murderous. Knox's gaze was sharp, assessing. Sinclair's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of amusement, like he was entertained by the interruption. Ivy's throat went dry. Too late to back out now. She swallowed hard. That clause on page 17, subsection C. It gives Sinclair Holdings executive decision-making authority over all assets post-merger. Ryan scoffed. It's a standard provision. No, it's not, Ivy cut in, flipping through the document. Not in deals structured like this. If this goes through, they can override any internal decisions. They wouldn't be merging with us, they'd be taking over. A long silence. Sinclair's lawyer shifted in his seat. Knox's fingers tapped against the table, slow and calculated. Then, he leaned back, eyes locked on Sinclair. Is that what you were hoping for? Sinclair smiled, the kind that sent warning bells through the room. I was hoping, he said smoothly, that no one would notice. Knox didn't smile back. Instead, he turned to Ivy. For the first time, really looking at her. Fix it. Ryan tensed. She's not. Knox cut him off without looking away from Ivy. Now. A challenge. A test. And Ivy. She wasn't about to fail. 30 minutes later, the contract was revised, renegotiated, and restructured. Sinclair wasn't pleased. But Knox. Knox was impressed. As the meeting ended, he stopped beside Ivy, lowering his voice just enough for only her to hear. I don't like surprises. Ivy held his gaze. Neither do I. A pause. Then, Knox's lips curved slightly. Good. You start sitting at the table from now on. And just like that, Ivy Quinn was no longer just an assistant. She was a player in the game. Ivy should have seen it coming. The moment she spoke up in that meeting, the moment Knox Wilder told her she belonged at the table, she had put a target on her back. And Ryan Dawson. He was aiming right at it. It started subtly. A few sideways glances. Quiet whispers that died the moment she walked into a room. Then, the comments. Guess being cute gets you far around here, huh? Didn't take long for her to become Wilder's favorite. Think she's got an actual brain, or just a pretty face? At first, Ivy ignored it. She knew exactly where it was coming from. Ryan. He had been seething ever since she outmaneuvered him in front of Sinclair. And now, he was playing dirty. I hope you're enjoying your newfound popularity. Ivy looked up from her desk, finding Olivia Foster standing over her, arms crossed. Let me guess, Ivy sighed, Ryan Dawson. Olivia gave her a look. You really don't know when to shut up, do you? Ivy smirked. Would I be here if I did? Olivia exhaled sharply. He's saying you're only here because Knox likes you. That your promotion wasn't because of your skills. Ivy's stomach twisted. She had worked her ass off for this. And now, Ryan was reducing it to a rumor, a lie, a damn insult. Let me guess, people are believing it, she muttered. Olivia didn't answer. That was enough. Ivy clenched her fists. I'll handle it. Olivia sighed. Yeah. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Ivy's jaw tightened. By proving I deserve to be here. Ryan Dawson wasn't the type to lose quietly. And when his petty whispers and office gossip didn't get rid of her fast enough, he escalated. 2 days after the Sinclair meeting, a formal complaint landed on Mr. Harris' desk. Ryan had officially requested Ivy's termination. The accusations: lack of qualifications, unethical favoritism from Knox Wilder, potential damage to the firm's reputation. Bullshit. But to some people in this firm, believable bullshit. Especially to Mr. Harris. When Ivy was summoned to his office, she expected it to be bad. She just didn't expect Ryan to be there too. Ms. Quinn, Harris began, his voice unreadable. Do you know why you're here? Ivy's stomach tightened. No, sir. But I'm guessing it has to do with him. She tilted her head toward Ryan, who simply smiled like a snake. Ryan has raised some concerns, Harris continued. And frankly, I understand them. You're not a lawyer. You weren't hired through our usual recruitment process. And yet, you've been involved in high-profile cases within weeks of arriving. Ivy's jaw clenched. Because I proved I could handle it. Or because Knox Wilder wants you here. Ryan mused, fake sympathy dripping from his voice. Ivy turned to him, her eyes burning with defiance. You think I need Knox to keep me here? That I can't stand on my own? Ryan's smirk widened. I think you won't be standing here much longer. She could feel Harris watching. Calculating. Finally, he sighed. Here's the deal, Ms. Quinn. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. I don't make decisions based on rumors. I make them based on results. Right now, you have an opportunity to prove whether you belong here or not. Ivy stayed silent, waiting. There's a final contract review for Mr. Bennett this week, Harris continued. Ryan will oversee it, but you'll be the one making the final adjustments. Ryan's expression didn't change, but Ivy could feel the tension spike. If you get it right, Harris said, you stay. If you don't, I'm out, Ivy finished. A test. A rigged one, no doubt. But she'd faced worse. She looked Harris dead in the eye and nodded. Fine. Challenge accepted. 2 days later, the trap was set. Mr. Bennett, a high-profile client with a multi-million-dollar contract, was scheduled for a final review. It was routine. A deal Ryan himself had been handling. But just hours before the meeting, an urgent message landed in Ivy's inbox. A last-minute adjustment to the contract. Something felt off. Ryan had been eerily quiet since the rumors started. And now, out of nowhere, he was trusting her with one of the most important contracts of the year. Bullshit. But she had no choice. She went over the document, checking every word, making sure nothing could go wrong. Then she sent it. And waited. Ms. Quinn, a word. Ivy had barely stepped out of the meeting when Mr. Harris' voice cut through the hall. She turned. He was standing with Ryan, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ivy's pulse spiked. Something wrong? She asked, forcing herself to stay calm. Ryan tilted his head, feigning concern. You tell us. Harris tossed a file onto the table beside them. That is the contract you sent to Mr. Bennett. Ivy glanced at it, confused. Okay. Turn to page 22. She did. And froze. The wrong clause. The entire deal, months of work, millions of dollars, was jeopardized because of a single line that shouldn't have been there. Her heart pounded. No, she breathed. That wasn't. Ryan clucked his tongue. OOF. That's a tough mistake. Ivy's blood ran cold. She had checked that document. She knew what she sent. This wasn't her mistake. This was a setup. And Ryan Dawson had just buried a knife in her back. Mr. Harris' expression was hard as stone. This firm does not tolerate incompetence. Ivy's breath caught. Sir, I swear, I reviewed that document. This isn't. So what are you saying? Ryan interjected smoothly. That someone deliberately changed it after you sent it. Ivy's jaw tightened. That's exactly what I'm saying. Ryan feigned a sympathetic look. Well, unless you have proof, that's going to be a hard sell. Ivy's stomach twisted. Proof? She had nothing. No way to show that Ryan had tampered with the file. And he knew it. Mr. Harris sighed. Knox will make the final decision, he said. But if I were you, I'd prepare for the worst. With that, he walked away. Ryan turned to Ivy, leaning in slightly. You thought you could just waltz in here and take a seat at the table, he murmured, voice dripping with mockery. Ivy's fists curled. Enjoy the view while you can, Quinn. He smirked. Because after this, you're done. He walked off. Ivy stood frozen, rage and panic twisting inside her. She had fought too hard to lose now. And if Ryan thought she was just going to roll over and let him win, he had another thing coming. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Ivy glanced down. Knox Wilder, one new message. My office. Now. Ivy exhaled sharply, squaring her shoulders. If Knox wanted a fight, she was more than ready. Ivy stepped into Knox's office, pulse steady, spine straight. He was waiting, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, watching her like a puzzle he was still figuring out. Shut the door. His voice was calm, but she wasn't fooled. Ivy obeyed. Knox tapped his fingers against the desk. Tell me why I shouldn't fire you right now. She exhaled, forcing her voice to stay even. Because I didn't make that mistake. Ryan did. His gaze didn't waver. And you have proof. Ivy hesitated. That was the problem. She knew she was right, but she didn't have the evidence to back it up. Knox sighed, rubbing his temple. I don't have time for half-baked theories, Quinn. Either give me something concrete, or... A soft knock interrupted him. The door opened, and Olivia Foster walked in, her expression unreadable. Actually, Olivia said, locking eyes with Ivy, she might have something after all. Ivy sat frozen as Olivia placed a USB drive on Knox's desk. Security footage, Olivia said simply. Ryan accessed the system and altered the contract 3 minutes after Ivy sent it. IT flagged it, but he has enough pull that no one questioned him. Knox picked up the USB, turning it between his fingers. His expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Why are you helping me? Ivy asked, narrowing her eyes. Olivia crossed her arms. Because Ryan Dawson is a snake. And unlike him, I prefer my battles to be fair. A beat of silence. Then, Knox stood, adjusting his cuffs. Well then, he murmured, let's see how Dawson handles getting outplayed. 2 hours later, the entire executive team was gathered in the main conference room. Ryan Dawson sat at the table, smug as ever, confident in his win. Then the footage played. The room fell into dead silence. Ryan's smirk vanished. Mr. Dawson, Knox said smoothly, do you have anything to say for yourself? Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. Mr. Harris leaned forward, voice cold. This firm does not tolerate sabotage. You're done. A muscle in Ryan's jaw twitched. You can't prove I meant to frame her, he tried, but his voice wasn't as steady as before. Knox just smiled. You really want to try your luck with a lawsuit, Dawson? Against me? Ryan's face paled. Mr. Harris stood. Pack your things. Security will escort you out. As Ryan collected his things, he stopped beside Ivy, leaning in just enough that only she could hear. You think you've won? His voice was low, filled with venom. The world isn't built for people like you, Quinn. It chews you up and spits you out. Ivy didn't flinch. She just smiled, voice razor sharp. Then I guess it's a good thing I'm not like you. Ryan's jaw clenched. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The moment the doors closed behind him, Knox exhaled. Well, he said, adjusting his tie, that was satisfying. Ivy just grinned. She wasn't done proving herself yet. And after today, neither Knox nor Mr. Harris would ever underestimate her again. The office was silent. The city outside hummed with life, but inside Wilder Wexler, it was just them. Ivy and Knox sat across from each other, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, half-drunk coffee cups, and the kind of unspoken tension that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. You know, Ivy muttered, flipping through a contract. I didn't expect staying late at the office to be part of my job description. Knox smirked, not looking up from his screen. It isn't. But you're the one who insisted on proving you belonged here. Ivy rolled her eyes. Oh, right. Because I just love working until midnight for fun. Knox finally glanced up, amusement flickering in his steel-gray eyes. Then why are you still here? She froze for half a second, just enough for the question to sink in. Why was she still here? Because she wanted to prove herself. Sure. Because she wasn't a quitter. Absolutely. But also, because being near him was dangerous in a way she couldn't explain. And judging by the way Knox was watching her now, he felt it too. The tension shifted. 1 second, they were colleagues. The next, the air felt too thick, the room too small, and the space between them suddenly non-existent. Knox leaned back in his chair, studying her like a puzzle he hadn't quite solved yet. You impress me, Quinn. Ivy blinked. That was unexpected. Excuse me. Knox's lips quirked. Don't make me say it again. Ivy tilted her head, arms crossing. So that's how you give compliments? Like it physically pains you? His smirk deepened. Would you rather I didn't say it at all? Damn him. Her pulse spiked, but she forced herself to stay cool. No. I'd rather you admit that maybe, just maybe, you underestimated me. Knox chuckled, shaking his head. I never underestimated you, Quinn. Then, softer, more serious. I just didn't expect you to keep proving me wrong. Ivy swallowed. She wasn't sure if he meant her skills in the firm, or the way she was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. Knox stood, stretching slightly before walking over to the window. You should go home, he murmured, looking out at the city. Ivy hesitated. She should go. But instead, she found herself standing beside him, staring at the same skyline. I don't think you go home much either, she said quietly. Knox's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Silence stretched between them, until he finally turned to face her. And suddenly, they weren't just standing side by side. They were too close. Close enough that she could see the faint shadows of exhaustion under his eyes. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body against the cool office air. Her breath hitched. Knox's gaze dropped to her lips, just for a second. A flicker. Then, he stepped back. The moment shattered. Good night, Quinn. His voice was lower, rougher than before. Ivy clenched her jaw, forcing herself to move, to breathe. Good night, Wilder. She turned on her heel and walked out before she did something stupid. As she stepped into the elevator, Ivy let out the breath she didn't realize she was holding. What the hell was that? Whatever it was. It couldn't happen again. Because no matter how tempting Knox Wilder was, sleeping with the boss, that was a line she wasn't willing to cross. Right. Ryan Dawson wasn't done. Not even close. After being humiliated and thrown out of Wilder Wexler, he did exactly what men like him always did. He found someone even more powerful to hide behind. And that someone? Philip Sinclair. A corporate titan. A ruthless strategist. A man who didn't lose. Ryan knew that if he wanted revenge, he needed to hit Knox where it hurt the most. Not through office politics. Not through rumors. But through something bigger. Something legal. And Sinclair had just the plan. The first blow came in the form of a lawsuit. Filed directly against Wilder Wexler. A $500 million case claiming breach of contract, fraud, and corporate misconduct. And the plaintiff? Sinclair Global. Knox stared at the document in his hands, jaw tight. This is bullshit. His voice was calm, but Ivy could see the fury simmering beneath it. Olivia Foster was pacing beside him, scrolling through emails. Sinclair isn't just suing us, he's taking it to the press. The media's already running stories about corporate corruption at Wilder Wexler. Ivy frowned, heart pounding. This feels personal. Knox's grip on the papers tightened. Because it is. He looked up, eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. Philip Sinclair has been trying to get his foot in this firm for years. And now, thanks to Dawson, he has an excuse to burn it to the ground. Ivy's stomach twisted. Ryan Dawson was behind this. After everything, he was still finding ways to screw her over. Knox exhaled slowly, thinking, calculating. We have two choices, he said. Settle, and let Sinclair own us. His voice darkened. Or fight. Ivy didn't hesitate. Then we fight. Knox's eyes flickered to her. A beat of silence. Then, His lips curled slightly, approval flashing in his gaze. "That's what I thought you'd say." The days that followed were a war zone. Piles of legal documents. Constant media scrutiny. Clients growing nervous. Inside the firm, tension was at an all-time high. And Sinclair. He wasn't just playing legal chess. He was playing psychological warfare. Anonymous tips sent to journalists. Allegations surfacing from nowhere. A slow, deliberate attack on the firm's credibility. Ryan Dawson's influence was all over it. Ivy could feel the noose tightening. "They don't just want to win," she muttered to Olivia one night. "They want to bury us." Olivia nodded grimly. "And they might, if we don't find a way to turn this around." One night, after another long strategy session, Ivy found Knox in his office, alone. Leaning against his desk. Sleeves rolled up. Jaw clenched. She hesitated before stepping in. "You okay?" Knox exhaled through his nose. "No." Ivy crossed her arms. "What's the plan, Wilder?" His eyes met hers, sharp, decisive. "We don't just defend. We hit back." Ivy raised an eyebrow. "How?" A slow, dangerous smirk appeared. "By showing the world exactly who Philip Sinclair really is." Ivy didn't sleep for 2 days. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't have time to. She had spent every waking hour dissecting Sinclair's case, every loophole, every hidden clause, every buried contradiction. And at 3:47 a.m., fueled by nothing but cold coffee and sheer determination, she found it. A contractual inconsistency, buried deep in the acquisition paperwork. A clause that, if used correctly, could dismantle Sinclair's entire plan. She barely took a second to celebrate. Instead, she grabbed her phone and called Knox. The second he picked up, voice groggy with sleep, she said, "Get to the office. Now." By the time Knox arrived, hair slightly tousled from sleep, Ivy was already pacing. She shoved the document into his hands, eyes blazing. "Sinclair can't legally acquire Wilder Wexler." Knox blinked, processing. "What?" Ivy pointed at the clause. "There's a conflict of interest clause that directly contradicts the terms of their takeover bid. If we expose this, Sinclair's case collapses." Knox skimmed the document, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. Then, something like admiration flickered in his gaze. "You're sure?" he asked. "Positive." A slow, proud smirk formed on his lips. "Then let's burn them to the ground." The next morning, Ivy walked into the conference room with her head held high. At the head of the table sat Mr. Harris, arms crossed, face unreadable. "I hear you've found something," he said. Ivy didn't hesitate. "Yes. A clause that nullifies Sinclair's bid." She laid out her findings, speaking with absolute confidence. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, Mr. Harris exhaled slowly. For the first time, he looked at her not as an outsider, but as someone who truly belonged. "Then I suppose," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you should be the one to lead the negotiations." Ivy's heart skipped a beat. She had expected resistance. Pushback. One last challenge. Instead, he was handing her the reins. She felt Knox's gaze on her. When she turned, he gave her the slightest nod. He trusted her. And now, it was time to prove why. The conference room felt more like a war zone. Across the long mahogany table, Philip Sinclair sat, with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Beside him, Ryan Dawson, smug as ever. Knox Wilder sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, but his presence undeniably powerful. And at his right, Ivy Quinn. Ready, unshaken, and dangerously prepared to dismantle them both. "Shall we begin?" Sinclair said smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks. "Frankly, I'd rather not waste time." Ivy tilted her head, feigning confusion. "You're in a hurry to lose." Sinclair's jaw ticked. "Miss Quinn," Ryan cut in, "this is a negotiation. If you'd rather play games." "Oh, I'm not playing, Dawson." Ivy slid a file across the table, her voice razor sharp. "I'm winning." Sinclair picked it up, flipping through the pages. And then, his entire demeanor shifted. Ivy saw it. The slight tensing of his fingers. The way his eyes darkened just enough. She had him. "You're bluffing," Sinclair muttered. "Am I?" Ivy leaned forward. "Because what you're holding in your hands, that's a legally binding document stating that any entity attempting to acquire Wilder Wexler must meet specific conditions, none of which Sinclair Enterprises fulfills." Sinclair's grip tightened on the papers. Ryan frowned, grabbing a copy for himself. The deeper he read, the paler he became. Ivy's smirk was pure satisfaction. "Oh, and before you argue oversight, let me save you the trouble." She tapped the page. "This clause was put in place over a decade ago." "Meaning?" She paused for dramatic effect. "Your takeover was never legally possible to begin with." For the first time, Sinclair had no words. "And Ryan?" His hands curled into fists. "This is bullshit," he hissed. "We can. You can nothing." Knox finally spoke, his tone cold, final, absolute. "The deal is dead. Wilder Wexler is off the table." Silence. Then Sinclair exhaled sharply, slamming the folder shut. "You win this round, Wilder." His voice was calm, but his eyes promised revenge. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Dawson, let's go." Ryan hesitated, then shot one last, venomous look at Ivy. "This isn't over," he muttered. Ivy smiled. "For you." She cocked her head. "Oh, Ryan, it absolutely is." Ryan's face darkened, but Sinclair was already walking out. He had no choice but to follow. And just like that, it was over. As the doors shut behind them, the room stayed silent. Then, Knox exhaled. A slow, satisfied smirk tugged at his lips as he turned to Ivy. "Remind me again why I ever doubted you." Ivy chuckled, shaking her head. "I have no idea." A beat. Then Knox said, lower, softer, more real than ever before. "I never did." Something in Ivy's chest tightened. She met his gaze, her breath hitching. And for the first time since she had stepped into this firm, she knew. She had finally earned her place. Ryan Dawson thought he still had a shot. After being forced out of Wilder Wexler, he refused to go down quietly. Instead, he ran straight to Philip Sinclair, hoping to turn his loss into a comeback. For a while, it worked. Sinclair welcomed him with open arms, feeding into his resentment, arrogance, and thirst for revenge. "We're going to make Wilder Wexler pay for what they did to you," Sinclair had promised. Ryan believed him. Until he realized. Sinclair didn't see him as a partner. He was just another pawn. So when Sinclair's grand plan to take down Wilder Wexler fell apart, Ryan went down with it. The legal world watched as his name was dragged through the mud, again. The whispers started. The blacklist grew. No law firm wanted to touch a twice-disgraced lawyer, who had made enemies out of two of the most powerful firms in the city. Ryan Dawson was officially finished. And this time, there was no coming back. Philip Sinclair had built his empire on deception, intimidation, and ruthless ambition. But when he came for Wilder Wexler, he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated Knox Wilder. After the failed takeover, Knox and Mr. Harris made sure Sinclair's firm never recovered. Stock prices plummeted. High-profile clients severed ties. Regulatory investigations started piling up. Sinclair tried everything to contain the damage. But the final blow. Knox personally ensured that no major firm in the city would ever work with him again. "Try to come for me again," Knox had told him, voice dangerously calm, "and I won't just ruin your company. I'll erase you from this industry." Sinclair never tried again. A week later, Ivy sat outside Mr. Harris' office, trying not to bounce her knee. She had fought for this firm. She had proven herself. She had won. But was it enough? The door opened. Knox stepped out first, his expression unreadable. Then came Mr. Harris, his usual cold demeanor replaced by something else. "Respect. Miss Quinn," he said, voice firm. "Welcome to Wilder Wexler. As our newest law associate." Ivy froze. "Wait. You mean?" Knox's lips curved into the smallest smirk. "You earned it." For a split second, Ivy thought she might actually cry. Instead, she exhaled sharply, lifted her chin, and smiled. About damn time. Ryan Dawson disappeared from the legal world. Philip Sinclair lost everything. And Ivy Quinn. She wasn't just a delivery girl anymore. She was a lawyer in the making. And this was just the beginning. Ivy Quinn had conquered every battle thrown her way. She had walked into Wilder Wexler as nothing more than a delivery girl. Now, she was one of the most promising young attorneys in Chicago. But amidst all the victories, there was one thing left unresolved. Knox Wilder. Their connection had always been there. Sharp debates. Lingering glances. That undeniable tension. Yet, neither of them had ever said it aloud. Until now. One afternoon, a formal notice landed on Ivy's desk. It bore the Wilder Wexler insignia, signed by William Harris himself. Internal summons. Miss Quinn. You are required to appear before an internal panel at 6 p.m. in the firm's mock courtroom. This is a matter of utmost importance. Sincerely. W. Harris. Ivy frowned. A panel. A hearing. She wasn't aware of any internal investigations. And something about it felt off. Still, she straightened her blazer, grabbed her case files, and headed to the courtroom. When she stepped inside, she froze. The courtroom was packed. Every major player was there. Emma Brooks, practically vibrating with excitement. Olivia Foster, arms crossed, smirking knowingly. Mr. Harris, seated as presiding judge. Associates and partners, whispering among themselves. And at the plaintiff's table, Knox Wilder. Dressed impeccably, leaning back in his chair like he owned the damn courtroom. Which, technically, he did. Ivy's brows furrowed. What the hell is going on? Harris tapped his gavel. Miss Quinn, take your seat at the defense table. Confused but intrigued, Ivy did as told. Harris cleared his throat. This internal hearing is now in session. The plaintiff, Knox Wilder, will state his claim. Knox stood, buttoning his suit jacket, his gaze locking onto hers with that signature smirk. Your Honor, I am here today because the defendant, Ivy Quinn, has committed an egregious offense. Gasps echoed across the room. Ivy blinked. Excuse me. Knox continued smoothly. The defendant has, over the course of several months, unlawfully and without due process, stolen something irreplaceable. More whispers. Ivy crossed her arms. And what, exactly, have I stolen? Knox stepped closer, voice dropping just enough to send a shiver down her spine. My heart. The room erupted in laughter and cheers. Ivy. She just stared at him. This cocky, infuriating, ridiculously brilliant man. Mr. Harris sighed dramatically. Mr. Wilder, do you have supporting evidence for this claim? Knox turned back to his desk, picked up a legal document, and walked toward her. With a satisfied smirk, he slid it across the table. This is a lifetime contract, he said smoothly. It states that you, Miss Quinn, agree to be my partner in all matters, both professional and personal. Effective immediately. Non-negotiable. Ivy flipped it open. Anne froze. It was an actual marriage license. Signed. Sealed. With her name and his already printed. Her pulse skyrocketed. She looked up, heart pounding. Knox reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee. The laughter died. The room fell silent. And in that moment, it was just them. Ivy Quinn, he said, voice uncharacteristically soft. From the moment I met you, you've challenged me, infuriated me, and somehow, against all logic, made me a better man. You didn't just prove that you belong here, you proved that you belong with me. Knox opened a velvet box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. So I'm giving you one last argument to tear apart, one final clause to dispute. But know this. This is a contract I hope you'll sign for life. Ivy exhaled sharply, pretending to examine the contract. She mused. This clause says you'll love me forever, but it doesn't specify that I have to love you back. Seems unfair to the plaintiff. Knox chuckled. So, what's your counteroffer? Ivy leaned forward, smirking. Mutual terms. A partnership, in every sense of the word. We win together, we fight together, and we build something unstoppable, together. Knox's smile softened. Done. Then? Ivy took the pen, signed the contract, and turned to Mr. Harris. Your Honor, I accept the terms. The courtroom exploded in applause. Knox slipped the ring onto her finger. And then he kissed her. Long, deep. A victory sealed not by a contract, but by love. Emma burst into tears. Olivia rolled her eyes, but was smiling. Mr. Harris muttered, finally. Ryan Dawson, if present, probably combusted from sheer frustration. And at that moment, Ivy Quinn and Knox Wilder were no longer just a force in the courtroom. They were a force together. As they stepped out onto the rooftop later that night, overlooking the city lights of Chicago, Knox whispered, Are you ready to take on the world with me? Ivy laced her fingers with his, smiling. Always. Ivy Quinn's journey wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder. It was about proving that where you come from doesn't define where you're going. It was about fighting for your place at the table, even when the whole world tells you that you don't belong. It was about love, ambition, and knowing that true power comes from standing your ground. Ivy walked into Wilder Wexler as a delivery girl. And she left as a top-tier attorney and a power player. She wasn't born into privilege. She didn't have an Ivy League degree. But she had talent, determination, and the courage to fight for herself. Your background doesn't dictate your future. You do. Ivy faced workplace politics, power-hungry rivals, and a system designed to keep people like her out. She didn't just play the game. She rewrote the damn rules. She exposed corruption. She dismantled Sinclair's empire. She earned her place, without shortcuts, without favors. True justice isn't given. It's taken. Ryan Dawson played dirty. He wanted power, and he was willing to crush Ivy to get it. Philip Sinclair. Another man blinded by greed, underestimating the wrong woman. But betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes, it comes from people you once trusted. Not everyone clapping for you is on your side. Keep your circle tight. Knox Wilder was a shark. Cold. Calculated. Unstoppable. Until Ivy walked in and challenged everything he thought he knew. Love didn't make them weaker. It made them stronger. They were a team, not just in romance, but in life, in law, and in power. The strongest relationships are built on respect, trust, and two people pushing each other to be unstoppable. Ivy Quinn didn't wait for opportunities. She took them. She didn't let people box her in. She broke out. She didn't just survive the corporate battlefield. She won. You don't need permission to be great. You don't need validation to know your worth. The only thing you need is the guts to go after what's yours. Chicago, midnight. Wilder Wexler rooftop. Ivy and Knox stood side by side, looking over the city they now ruled together. Knox smirked. We really did this, huh? Ivy leaned into him, smiling. We did. He turned to her, eyes full of something deeper than victory. Something permanent. So, what's next, Quinn? She laced her fingers with his, her gaze steady. Whatever the hell we want, Wilder.